Open your Bibles to Jeremiah chapter 15, please. Jeremiah chapter 15. And we'll get back into our study of this particular book. And I will readily admit at the outset of our study of this chapter that there are moments in this chapter that I found it difficult to figure out who's he talking about. Who is the enemy? And who is it that's being addressed at particular moments? And the truth of the matter is, we'll probably get a couple of different variations of thought in that tonight, and we'll both probably be just as equally right in that conclusion, because it's hard to know. Context leads me one way, thought led me another way, and so it's a little bit difficult at times to try to determine. But let's look here at chapter 15 of the book of Jeremiah, and use our lesson sheets as well to guide us through this particular chapter as we study together. And so each of these chapters generally breaks down with the same similar opening phrase. Here comes the message from Jehovah unto Jeremiah. He says something interesting in the very first verse. What's he say about Moses and Samuel? That even if what? Okay, and so God says to Jeremiah, even if it were Moses and Samuel, asking what? In the context of all of the prophecy. Yeah, even if it was Moses and Samuel begging on behalf of the people, Moses, what? In relationship to begging on behalf of the people? He accomplished it one time, right? Moses was successful in pleading the case with God in order to get mercy and compassion for the people. And so, basically, God tells Jeremiah, listen, don't feel bad that I'm not listening to who? To you, right? And I'm not listening. You've been asking and you've been pleading. It could have been Moses or Samuel pleading the case, and I still would have the same response. I found that was an interesting picture that God draws there in that first verse when He talks about it. Even two of the all-time greats, if you will, among God's people would not be able to convince God to turn from this path. And I found that somewhat fascinating. Go to your lesson sheets real quick, and we can answer a couple of questions in the process and get a general picture. So, he says there's going to be some measures or means by which that God uses, or instruments that God uses in terms of bringing His anger against the people. What were they? Okay, so the first one was death. The second one was sword. The third one was what? Famine. Okay. And the final one was captivity. Okay. Remember, we have talked several times in our study thus far about the fact that the challenge that's coming from Babylon, from the north down, is going to affect different people in the kingdom in different ways. Guess what? It's exactly what God just said here in His message to Jeremiah here in the opening part. Some people are going to what? Very first thing. Some people are going to die. Okay? What do you see when He says some will face the sword? Okay, war, battle, or if death is the extreme, then what else could sword do? Injure, right? That's what I saw in that. If he lists death as an entity to itself, then the sword doesn't necessarily have to kill. The sword can maim and mar and injure. And so death and war, battle, injury, and then because of the siege, there's no food. Okay, so we got famine on top of that. So some people may die by the direct conflict. Some may be hurt, injured by the conflict. Some will be starving to death because of the conflict. And others will simply be led captive away. And so it will affect different people in different ways. And we've illustrated that already in our study. But God brings it very specifically in relationship to those particular entities. And then he further illustrates it in verse 3 when he says, I will appoint over them 4 kinds, saith Jehovah, the sword to slay, the dogs to tear, the birds of the heaven and the beasts of the earth to devour and to destroy. And so, in more general senses, or in summary senses, the judgment of God that's coming, don't think that because you survived one layer that nothing else, that's all well and good. There's going to be multiple layers and issues and challenges and instruments used to bring this judgment against His people. And who was the cause of that? Who did He illustrate was the problem here? Verse 4. Okay, so you're going to be tossed to and fro among all the kingdoms in the earth because of Manasseh, the son of Hezekiah, king of Judah, for that which he did in Jerusalem. And our worksheets shared with us a few contexts of Scripture to illustrate and remind us of what kind of man Manasseh was. So let's look at those real quick. In 2 Kings chapter 21 and in verse 2, he did what? That which was evil after the abominations of the nations whom Jehovah had cast down. You think about it, I don't know that we appreciate the insult to God that is when God comes into the land and basically pushes those nations out so that His people can come and it. And to thank Him for that, what did His people do? Turn around and made allegiances and took the gods and the character and the social norms of the people round about them. You turned to the very abominations that I drove out of here. I tried to protect you, and I drove all this out. And then you turned around and adopted the very abominations of the things that I tried to remove out of you. And that's right. And even went beyond. Exactly right, Randy. Even went beyond what those other nations had done in relationship to their sin. Down in verse 11. Because Manasseh, king of Judah, hath done these abominations, and hath done wickedly above all that the Amorites had done. And he particularly made Judah to sin how? With idols, the text says. And so it wasn't bad enough that Manasseh had adopted these personal character traits on his own, but he's leading the people right down the same road. And he's leading them into the same destructions and challenges that came. Verse 16. Moreover, Manasseh shed what? Innocent blood. Shed innocent blood, and not just a little, but what? Very much, till he had filled Jerusalem from one end to the other. It's an imagery I don't want to think about, to be quite honest with you, about the savagery that Manasseh had wreaked against God's people. And then he said, and you can read the rest of it in verse 17. You can read the rest of the acts of Manasseh and all he had done and the sins that he had committed. Are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings? Lots and lots of things that he had done. Jump to chapter 23. Verse 26. Notwithstanding, Jehovah turned not from the fierceness of His great wrath, wherewith His anger was kindled against Judah, because of all the provocations wherewith Manasseh had provoked him. So, Manasseh is sinful in his behavior. He's wicked. He's doing the abominations of the nations round about him. He's leading Judah into idolatry. And in the meantime, what's he doing in relationship to God? And what's the word? He's provoking him. Okay? There may be some folks you can get away with provoking. I don't know that God would be someone or being that I would want to provoke. I don't know that I would poke a stick at God and just in a sense almost dare God to do something about the sins and abominations that I'm involved in. But every step of the way, Manasseh is kindling this anger of God. And it reaches even this great boiling point in the days of Jeremiah that we're reading concerning. And he gave you one other text in 2 Kings 24 and in verse 3. He said, to remove them out of his sight for the sins of Manasseh, according to all that he did, also for the innocent blood that he shed, for he filled Jerusalem with innocent blood. And so, go back to your worksheets for a second. And what did we see here? What were the things that he had done? Okay, he did evil. Okay, innocent blood. Okay, idols. What's the generic word we use? He sinned, right? He sinned against God. What was the one we saw there in chapter 23? That he provoked him. That he provoked God. Anything else we saw, or that you saw in those? We might add, he involved the people in the abomination of the nations round about him. Yeah, he led the people into that as well. Yeah, and what did God do with Sodom? But Ezekiel recounts how it had gone beyond the sins of that place. Difficulty to even imagine how desperately sinful the people had become under Manasseh's leadership, and they're reaping the consequences here years later, but they're still reaping the consequences of his actions and the root problems that he created among the people. Sometimes the root doesn't always necessarily spring up immediately. And sometimes you're able to navigate through some of the initial challenges that might come. But if the root stays in place, and apparently it had with the people, that root that Manasseh had planted, it stayed in place and ultimately comes and rears itself again here at the end before God brings judgment upon him. Yeah. Although it didn't happen in Manasseh's time, but the destruction came because of the iniquity of Manasseh. Right. And we sometimes have to make a disconnect, Kevin, between, and not that you connected them, but we have to remember that a child isn't culpable or responsible for the sins of their father. But that doesn't mean the consequences of their father's actions don't fall on the heads of those children. I could go out here and do something senseless, and my children don't bear the sin of what I did, but they may very well bear the consequence of what I did. And that's the difference between those two things. Sometimes people melt those together and almost act like, well, one's got to be right and one's got to be wrong. No, they can both be part of the picture of God. One means I'm not responsible for what my dad did. The other means what I do today may very well have a lasting effect on other people long after I'm gone in the choices I make. That's right. And you look at all of it, and you get a whole picture of how all that works. Any other thoughts to that moment? In verses 5 and 6 then, what's God say is not coming? Who will have what on them? Pity, right? Okay. It's not coming. You ever seen someone? I almost said you ever seen a child. I've seen almost more adults looking for pity sometimes than you do children. But you've seen that, and it's not pleasant, is it? And you don't even know how to deal with it sometimes. Where here's this pitiful circumstance, but God says, you brought this on yourselves. And He said, you're going to reach a point where who will have pity upon thee, O Jerusalem? Who's going to bemoan thee? Who will turn aside to ask of thy welfare? Who are they thinking is going to do that? They're hoping God might turn aside to that. He said, it's not me. And who else have they trusted? Yeah, those idols. And they're dead as a doornail, right? They can't do anything. And the nations round about them. You think when Judah gets down that all these nations that have been in on-again, off-again relationships and allegiances with Judah is going to sit back and feel sorry for them when Babylon comes and turns their attention? If Babylon's paying attention to Judah, who isn't Babylon paying attention to? Them, okay? There's no pity coming, he says. It's not coming from anywhere. Go ahead, Roger. Yeah. Yeah. Right. They're listening to all the wrong, and they're just assuming. Yeah. 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 Yep. Yeah. They will see them as vulnerable, not because you're exactly right. They have seen, history has revealed to them that when those people trusted in their God, great things happened, and nobody could deal with them. No one could defeat them. No one could handle them. But when they see their God basically leave them, and that influence is gone, they'll see them as vulnerable, not somebody to be pitied, but somebody to be taken advantage of. Yeah. Right. Right. So they'd rejected God. And I stretched out my hand against thee and destroyed thee. I am weary of what? In verse 6. Relenting or repenting, depending on which translation you're reading from. God says, I'm done. I've relented and backed away and gave you opportunity and sent you new prophets. I'm done. I'm weary of it. I'm weary of it. Yeah. 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 And I want to point that word out to you, because the word weary, because I didn't put it in my later notes, and if I'll forget to come back to it now, because it's something I thought about, was a lot of people assume that's a characteristic that couldn't happen with God. A lot of people probably assume that God is so patient and so long-suffering and so wonderfully compassionate that it's an impossibility to weary Him. No, it's not. He clearly says to Jeremiah, I am weary. You can push. You can only push and provoke God for so long before He gets wearied of it and addresses it. And that's a lesson that we should learn within the text. What did He say in verses 7 through 9 about what He had tried to do? He said, I winnowed them with a fan in the gates. I bereaved them of children. I've destroyed my people, and yet they did what? They didn't. Okay, I tried small disciplinary actions, smaller scale. Okay, I didn't just immediately bring, see Babylon come in, see one sin committed or one atrocity or one problem, and immediately sent Babylon. He said, I tried to educate you along the path. Ignored it. Widows increased to me above the sand of the seas. I brought upon them against the mother of the young men a destroyer at noonday. I have caused anguish and terrors to fall upon her suddenly. She's born, so that hath borne 7 languisheth. She hath given up the ghost. Her son is gone down while it is yet day. She hath been put to shame and confounded. And the residue of them will I deliver to the sword before their enemies, saith Jehovah. There's every attempt had been made. Every measure had been used to avoid the tremendous consequence of bringing Babylon into the picture. And they still turned. Or didn't turn. Yeah. I've tried to be protecting of the remnant. I've tried to distinguish who's the evil ones here. I've done everything in my power, and people still didn't turn and change. And it's just it's a sad picture that we've already been seeing through this text. So, to me, the next, what is there? I think there are 11 verses here. I think it goes to verse 21. It's an interesting picture of Jeremiah. We see a human being in the latter part of this chapter with Jeremiah, who is languishing and sorrowing in how do I deal with all this. He says in verse 10, or let me run to your question sheet because there's a direct question about it. What was Jeremiah's lament in verse 10? Yeah. I go back to the text for a minute. Woe is me, my mother, that hast borne me a man of strife and a man of contention to the whole earth. I've lamented, let's underline that word, since when? It's the figure. Since birth, since I've been born. Or maybe a different thought would be, I was born to bear. I was born to bear the suffering and the challenges and the strife, a man of contention to the whole earth. Is Jeremiah really a contention to the whole earth? No, he's a contention to who? Judah. But when the people that you're continually and directly in contact with are continually contentious with you, what does it feel like? It feels like the whole world, right? It may not be literally, but in many senses, it can reach a heaviness that it might as well be. That it might as well be the whole earth. Because, there's nothing else. It just keeps building and building. And then he says what at the end of verse 10? I didn't do what? Okay, so I didn't lend, neither have I lent to, or I didn't borrow, neither have men lent to me. Yet every one of them doth curse me. What does he mean by that? What do you think what's the symbol there or the picture? I don't owe anybody and nobody, right? Because generally that can cause problem, right? If I owe somebody and they're waiting on me to pay them back, then they're not going to be happy with me. And sometimes you can lend to somebody, and because they feel the guilt of that payment, there can be friction between the lender and the borrower in both directions. And so Jeremiah uses that picture and says, I'm neither one of those guys. Really all I've done is what? What's all he's done? Spoke God's word. That's it. All he's done is delivered the message that came from God. But he's hated. Yeah, and I think we do see that, not just here in this verse, but you see it as you can keep reading. Jeremiah is a defeated man in this moment, wondering, how am I going to handle the next phase? What's God say in verse 11? Okay. He says, verily I will strengthen thee for good, Verily I will cause the enemy to make supplication unto thee in the time of evil and in the time of affliction. Here's one of those moments, by the way. And then let me add verse 12. Can one break iron, even iron from the north, and brass? Here's one of those moments where I'm not so sure who the enemy is. Okay, naturally our inclination is, who's the enemy? Babylon's the enemy. You can say it, I can't apparently tonight. Babylon's the enemy. But that's not who he's complaining about in verse 10. Who's he complaining about in verse 10? Who's he lamenting over in verse 10? People, Judah. Okay? In chapter 42, in verses 1 through 3, let's speed ahead just for a moment. We'll talk about it again, but I want you to see it. Chapter 42, verse 1. Then all the captains of the forces, and Jehanan the son of Korah, and Jezanah the son of Hoshea, and all the people from the least even unto the greatest came near, and said unto Jeremiah the prophet, Let, we pray thee, our supplication. What did God tell him in chapter 15? I'm going to make your enemy come and do what? Make supplication to you. What happened here in verse 42? People of Judah came and made supplication. Be presented before thee. Pray for us unto Jehovah thy God, even for all this remnant. For we are left but a few of many, as thine eyes do behold us, that Jehovah thy God may show us the way wherein we should walk, and the thing we should do. And so, it could be the enemy. The enemy could be Judah, and they did come, some of them came, and did make supplication. Here's the problem. Jump over to chapter 40 and verse 4. And now behold, I loose thee this day from the chains which are upon thy hand. If it seem good unto thee to come with me into Babylon, come and I will look well unto thee. But if it seem ill unto thee to come with me into Babylon, forbear, behold, all the land is before thee. Whether it seem good and right unto thee to go, thither go. Rulers of Babylon come. And what do they say to Jeremiah? You want to come what? We're going to loosen these chains. We want to come back. So, my point is, Babylon's the enemy of Judah, and they come and offer an olive branch, if you will, to Jeremiah in chapter 40. Judah is an enemy of Jeremiah. They come and pay supplication to him in chapter 43. And so that's why I'm simply saying to you, I don't know. I couldn't convince... If you want to know what I think, I believe he's talking about Judah. That seems to be the picture. He's not lamenting that Babylon's coming in this moment. He has lamented over that. But he's lamenting that I didn't mistreat any of my people. I was neither borrower or lender. And they're treating me as if I was. That's the lament of verse 10. Now, I'll make the argument for you. He mentions what in verse 12? Iron, and he mentions what direction? North, okay? Pulls me right back the other way. Right? So you've got both imageries. Pick one. It may be both. The truth is, it may just, and probably might be very well both. That the weight, Judah hates me, and Babylon's coming to kill us. Nobody on earth likes me, Lord. Yeah. So he changes conversation by verse 12. And my only reason to even give Judah a thought in some senses is because if Judah isn't included, then God really didn't answer verse 10. He answered some other question. Because verse 10 seems to be about Judah. But that's not saying God could easily have done that too. I'm not saying God couldn't do that. I'm just saying that's what challenges me. And that's what I meant at the opening of our study tonight. This is one of those moments. I don't know that there's a perfect answer. I'm right with you on verse 12. Verse 12 screams Babylon. Verse 10 and what in verse 11, coupled with what happened in chapter 43, or 42 rather, lends itself maybe to Judah. Be that as it may, what's the end result here? Yeah, I'm going to help you through this, Jeremiah, okay? You may feel like the weight of the world's on your shoulders. Your own people don't like you. Babylon's coming. You got the weight of the world. I'm going to carry you through this. Okay? Thy substance, verse 13. Here's why I turn back to Judah. Because thy substance and thy treasures will I give for a spoil without price, and thou that for all thy sins, even in all thy borders. Who's that about? That is about Judah, right? Babylon's not just going to come and cause problems, but they're going to take what? Everything of value. Okay, they're going to take the spoils of war in relationship to those things. There was a question in your worksheets. How was God about to punish His sinful people in verses 13 and 14? I started to answer that. So the treasures will become a what? There'll be a spoil. What else? Okay. And the people will be taken captive. So everything of value will be taken as a spoil of war, and the people end up captive in the process. I'm going to punish the people. They're both involved. Yeah, I'm not necessarily, that wasn't what I was meaning by that. So, verse 15 through 18, Jeremiah says, You knowest, O Jehovah, thou knowest. Remember me, and visit me, and avenge me of my persecutors. Take me not away in thy long suffering. Know that for thy sake I have suffered reproach. Thy words were found, and I did eat them. Thy words were unto me a joy and the rejoicing of my heart, for I am called by thy name, O Jehovah, God of hosts. I sat not in the assembly of them that make merry, nor rejoiced. I sat alone because of thy hand, for thou hast filled me with indignation. Basically, Jeremiah is saying what to God? I did what? I've done everything you've asked me to do. I've done and it's a lonely place. When you sometimes in life, when you do everything God asks you to do, it can be a lonely place. And that's the way Jeremiah feels. I didn't go to the assemblies. In other words, I didn't go where? And make merry. I didn't go to the parties. I sat alone because of your hand. You filled me with indignation. Why is my pain perpetual, my wound incurable, which refuseth to heal? Wilt thou indeed be unto me as a deceitful brook, as waters that fail? What one word would you describe Jeremiah in verses 15 to 18? Okay, but let me ask you though, what's his disposition? Maybe that's a better way to ask it. Discouraged, depressed, alone, and in what? Pain and doubt. Yeah, yeah, right, right. And in verse 18, he feels like what? He's afraid that God's not going to be the refreshing water that he tells him he's going to. I'm afraid I'm going to come to that brook and it's going to be all dried up. He's got some doubts. But what's God do to reassure him in verses 19 through 21? Okay, he restores him. And I just simply put that God provides the means to remove the doubt. That's what God promises him. I'll give you every tool you need to remove the doubt. I'll make thee as a fortified brazen wall. They shall fight against thee, but they shall not prevail. I am with thee to save thee and to deliver thee. I'll deliver thee out of the hand of the wicked. I will redeem thee out of the hand of the trouble. I'm going to get you through this, Jeremiah. And we'll walk through this together. Quickly then, we've got about 10 minutes left, maybe 9. So what are the lessons? What did you see in this chapter? I see a weeping prophet. I see a pretty sad guy who's down. But what else specifically maybe you noticed? Yeah. Yeah. God is long-suffering, but that long-suffering has an end. Yeah. Don't provoke. Well, that looks really sloppy, doesn't it? That's the word provoked right there. What else did you see? Okay. God knows the remnant even when it may be small, and He's not going to forsake them. What else did you notice or write down? Verse 1 with Moses and Samuel, that taught us that prayer has what? Is prayer infinite and always answered in the way? It's got limits. Prayer has limits. That's not something we like to think about. We like to think prayer is limitless, that anything and everything's on the table, but it's not always. Even if Samuel and Moses had been praying to God over this matter, it wasn't what was fitting for the moment. I put out of verses 5 and 6 when he said that where are you going to get pity from? I just simply wrote, don't expect the world to be compassionate when the righteous fall. They won't be. Don't expect the world to come to your aid and want to encourage you when you fail as a child of God. The world will not pity you. It will look at you as vulnerable in those moments. And so don't expect compassion from a world. When you strive to live righteous, what you tend to get when you fall is indignation from the world. And so it's maybe not right, but it's the reality, and it was the reality he was seeing. Yeah, he understood the sadness of loneliness. God wants us to trust Him and His plan, even when it doesn't seem logical to us and it doesn't fit. In verses 15 to 18, to me, one of the things that I took from that conversation, I simply wrote in my notes that even the great ones have doubts sometimes. Even the greatest of servants of God, the great prophet Jeremiah, is in a moment of doubt. God, is this well going to dry up? Can I really trust? Can I really trust with the weight of the world on my shoulders right now? With a mindset that says I have been born for nothing but contention, when I can't seem to find relief anywhere, can I trust that your brook will have water when I come to it? And it just reminded me that even the great prophet Jeremiah had a moment, and he had to work through it. And I'm not such a bad guy after all when I have a moment and I have to work through it. Go ahead, Bob. Where God's very personalized approach towards us can come into effect, and certainly Jeremiah is reaching that stage. But I'm not excusing anything. I'm just acknowledging that I can relate to verses 15 to 18 of Jeremiah 15. I can relate to questions and doubts and wonders and having to figure out, do I have the spiritual fortitude? Do I have the faith? Do I have the conviction to trust in God's plan and work it through and stay the course when I seemingly every day wake up with a new question? And that's what I feel like. That's Jeremiah. And there are days I'm that way. You pillow your head and you long for for the morning to come, and you're praying for a new perspective, and you wake up, and all you got is another question. And, we're there. That's where we are sometimes. That's right. And that's when we have to be extremely sensitive to not give place to the devil in those moments. Because he's going to sense the doubts. He's going to sense the weakness of faith. He's going to see those moments. And so we are all there. And I'm just trying to illustrate it to you so that you understand that I'm not from a permissive standpoint necessarily, but just from a reality standpoint, we're all there sometimes. We all feel the heaviness of it all sometimes. And so raise our questions, and then at the end of the day, come back to what God told Jeremiah, that God provides the help to remove the doubt and to trust Him in it. And to trust Him. Do that. And maybe the tool of removing the doubt is simply reacquainting myself with that trust in God. And not being a results-driven faith. I think sometimes, and that may sound like a strange statement, but I'll try to explain what I mean. That sometimes our faith, our personal faith is contingent upon the results. I prayed for this and I got that. Faith is good. I prayed for this and I didn't get it. Faith is bad. And so we become a very results-driven people. Jeremiah could not be a results-driven prophet, could he? Why? He's not going to get any results, okay? There aren't any coming, okay? He's not going to save the nation, and yet he's still got to go preach to them. He's not going to stem the tide. The judgment's still coming, okay? His counterpart, one of them, is Ezekiel, right? Remember what God told Ezekiel to go preach to? A valley of what? Dry bones. Good luck with that, Ezekiel. Good luck with that. Go preach to that valley of dry bones. But then God reminded him that what? I can bring life even to the lifeless. I can restore this, Ezekiel. I can restore this. To Ezekiel, everything looked impossible. To Jeremiah, everything looks impossible. God says nothing is impossible with me. But be careful that we don't build what I simply call a results-driven faith. Because if it's always about results, if my faith is contingent upon getting what I thought and or what I asked for, I'm going to live a life challenged in my faith. Because there are going to be moments I don't always get what I want, and I don't always get what I prayed for, and it doesn't always work out like I thought it should. And if I'm always focused on results, moment of honesty, if I focused preaching on results, if my preaching was results driven, I'd have quit 15 years ago. And that's the absolute truth. I personally feel failure when the results you were hoping for and looking for out of certain work that you do, and it doesn't come to fruition. It's hard not to think that way, right? And so, don't misunderstand me. I'm not hoping you bemoan and pity. That's not what it's about. Well, I'm just trying to illustrate. I'm trying to personalize it because I need to do that sometimes. All I'm trying to say is, even as a preacher, I got to remove myself from that kind of thinking sometimes. I'm not always going to get the results. The lessons may have been some of the smartest things I've ever put on paper. And I know you're walking out of the building giving me the obligatory, that was a really nice lesson, preacher. And then other times you'll put together what you think was a complete and utter loss, and you'll see people walk out the door and go, I needed that today. and you just don't know. And so if I'm always relying upon results driven, so you can't do it with faith, you can't do it with preaching, you can't do it with personal work. You can't do it with any of those things. You just got to go do the work. Just go do the work. And not be so results driven. That to me was a great lesson out of this text. It jumped out at me. Lord willing, Sunday, chapter 16. I don't think I'll probably ever double up on a Sunday because our lesson time on Sunday mornings is shorter. And so I mentioned to you Sunday that there may be occasions where we do 2 chapters in a given study. That'll probably not happen on a Sunday because there's just not as much time on a Sunday to accomplish that. So chapter 16 is all you'll need to prep for this coming Sunday, chapter 16.